So let's start with adding the color to our artboard. So if I just click on it, you can see that this bounding box is appearing around the artboard. So it means that we are actually selecting the artboard. And I want to select the artboard because I want to first create the sky. So I can just go to the color picker right here. And I can just choose a dark color, maybe even darker. Maybe let's go with something closer to blue. Something like this should be fine. And I'm just going to hit close. And as you can see, it's just a matter of seconds to add a color to our artboard, and it's just a matter of seconds to create a sky. Of course, if you want to, you can just add the black fill to the artboard if you want to have a really dark sky. But I think that I am going to stick with this very dark blue color just so the scene is not that boring, that obvious. Now that we have, well, basically the sky created, now we gotta add some stars. And unfortunately, the process is a bit tedious, and there is no workaround. Well, at least I haven't found it yet. So if you do find the workaround for creating the stars or creating multiple variables, multiple different elements, just let me know. And let's just create the stars first by selecting the ellipse tool. And let me just off-click the artboard. Let me just now select the ellipse. I don't need any stroke. I'm going to make sure that I don't have the stroke selected. You can see that the width is set to 0. And for the fill, I'm going to go with something really light. And I'm just going to create an ellipse. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key to create an ellipse looking something like this. This should be fine. And again, let me just make sure that I don't have any stroke applied to this ellipse. And let me just quickly zoom in. So basically what we need to do right now is we need to clone this ellipse, well, multiple times. And let me just clone it again. So I'm holding down the Control key and dragging to clone these elements. One more and maybe one more somewhere here. Now, of course, we want to create well, an illusion that the stars have a different size, that they are not all equal. So here in the transform panel, I am going to link the width and the height. So I'm going to click on this link button, and I'm simply going to type in something really arbitrary like 4 instead of 10 pixels. And if we off click, you can see that we are making the star smaller. So I'm going to do the same with this star, this time maybe 5 pixels. I'm going to do the same with this one, but maybe 6 pixels. This guy maybe 7. This guy maybe even smaller, like 3. And this guy maybe 5. Right, so now we have all these stars right here. So now let's just grab all of them. Let me just move them a bit to the side. And I'm going to group them. So I'm just pressing Ctrl G on my keyboard. So now all we need to do is to just grab this group, Control drag it, just to move it to the side. And of course, we need some variety in our group. So there's a couple of things that we could do. First of all, we could maybe just flip these guys horizontally and move it to the side, maybe to somewhere here. So now I'm just going to clone this guy again to the left, and then we could maybe rotate it clockwise to somewhere here. And now we can just grab all these groups. Right now I'm shift clicking on them. If we just Control drag it to the side, we are going to create another cluster of stars. Let me just move this guy a bit to the left. Maybe let's clone this guy. And again, we can just flip them, rotate them a bit, maybe rotate them counterclockwise. Of course, we can just rotate them very arbitrarily like that. But of course, we could also just double click on a single piece like that, and we are actually targeting this star inside our group, so we can now move individual pieces if we want to. So I'm just double clicking on each individual star to move it a bit to the side. Of course, rotating and reflecting individual stars wouldn't give us any visible effect because they are all ellipses. So let me just move this guy a bit to the right. Same with this guy. So now what we could do is we could just select all these elements, clone them down, maybe to somewhere here, and then just press Ctrl J, Ctrl J, Ctrl J, and Ctrl J. So we are just simply duplicating the last transformation, which was moving and cloning at the same time. And now we can just grab some of these elements. We can just move them around. Let me just move this guy maybe to somewhere here. Why not? They can overlap each other. There we go. Now, if you don't want to, you could simply stop somewhere here. I mean, you don't have to create all these clusters. For instance, you can just get rid of this bottom cluster of stars, because of course we are going to have mountains right here. We are going to have some grass, the tent, the trees. So the stars won't be that visible. But if you do want to practice this technique, of course you can create as many stars as you want. Now, by the way, you could also select separate groups, let's say these ones. And if you start making them smaller, and I am holding down the Shift key to constrain the proportions, the stars within these clusters are also gonna get smaller. So it's not just like the group, like the big group is getting smaller, but also the individual pieces within the groups are getting smaller. So that's just another way of adding variety to our sky. Right, so we got the stars and we got a bunch of them. So now I guess it's time to just start creating the moon here in the top left corner. But before we do that, let's just quickly grab all these stars, all these groups, and group the groups. So I'm simply pressing Ctrl G. I think I missed this guy. So again, select all the groups, group them, and I'm just going to click on this group name, and I'm going to rename the group. And there we go, we got the stars created. So our next order of business would be to create the moon. First, before we start creating the moon, let's quickly lock the stars layer like that. And let's grab the ellipse tool. Let me just zoom in real close, like that. And let's just create an ellipse. I'm holding down the Shift key to create a perfect ellipse, perfect circle. And let me just add a proper color to the moon. Right, so what we want to do right now is not only we want to add the craters, we also would like to add some kind of a shading, an illusion of shading, just to make our moon look a bit more interesting. So what we need is we need something like a crescent maybe here on the left. So I guess the easiest way to do this would be to just clone this ellipse, I guess to somewhere here. So I'm just moving this ellipse and holding the Control key at the same time. And I'm just going to release the mouse button and the Control key. So right now we got two ellipses. So now let's just select both of them. And at this moment you can see these outlines right here showing us what we could achieve once we transformed these elements a bit. So here from the toolbar, I'm simply going to choose the divide option. And right now we have this element, we have this element, and of course we got the middle element. And since I want to create this shading effect here at the bottom, I'm going to get rid of this crescent. So I'm simply going to select it and delete it. and I'm going to add this darker fill to this crescent like that. So now let's move on to creating the craters, and as I mentioned before, we are going to use some Photoshop-like effects here inside Affinity Designer. So I'm gonna grab again the ellipse tool, and I'm going to create an ellipse that is going to look more or less like this. This should be all right. Now, the Photoshop-like effect that I am looking for is called inner shadow. So to add it, I'm just going to go to this little effects icon that says here layer effects. Of course, I got the ellipse selected, and if I click it, I'm going to see this layer effects window. And from this list on the left, I'm going to choose inner shadow. Just don't forget to click on this box right here. And here we got some different options for creating our inner shadow. I would suggest leaving the blend mode as multiply, because as you probably know, multiply is an effect that shows everything that is black or dark and hides everything that is light. So for a shading, I guess it's the best blending mode. Now, opacity is simply going to control the transparency of the effect, and radius is going to control how big our shading well actually is, and I guess you can already see the effect right here. Now the offset is going to control something like a bit of a position inside our crater. You can see that we are kind of like creating a big indent in our crater, and the intensity is going to make the shading darker or lighter. Of course, I would suggest leaving the color as black, but we could also just play around with with this angle, and I guess we could make it something like 225. We would like to make this inner shadow to be in line with our shading right here, so it's a good idea to make it look like the light is going from the top right going to the bottom left. And of course, now we can just adjust the position of our shading. Of course, it's all a matter of trial and error. Your shading can look just a bit better, just a bit different. Of course, it can look better than mine. Let me just maybe move it a bit. Okay, this should be all right. Now, before we just hit close, take a note of this little option right here that says scale with object. What it does is it makes sure that when you make this object bigger or smaller, these values are going to scale accordingly. So I am going to check it, and I'm going to hit close like that. So basically all we need right now is we need to just clone these elements, and I'm gonna make this guy smaller. There we go. Clone this guy, make it just a bit bigger. Clone it again, make it significantly smaller. Move these guys around, maybe clone it one more time and make it a bit bigger, maybe move it a bit to the side. And as you can see at this point, this shading is a bit, it doesn't look too good. What we could do is we could simply add a little bit of stroke, of the lighter stroke, to make it look something like this. And let's maybe clone maybe this smaller guy to somewhere here, and again add a bit of a stroke to it to make it look something like this. Of course, if you want, you can add even more craters, make them a bit smaller or make them a bit bigger. That is just totally up to you. We could maybe move this guy a bit to the right, make it smaller, and there we go. Let's leave it like that. I don't want you to look at me creating ellipses all afternoon. I think that our moon looks totally fine. So now I'm just going to select all these elements, group them again, and rename the group. I am going to call it, what it is, moon. There we go. Now we can move it a bit to the side, make it significantly smaller. And I would also like to create some kind of a glow around our moon, just so it pops out right here. In Affinity Designer, you can also add effects to whole groups, not just individual elements. So right now I can just go to, I have of course the moon group selected. Again, go to this effects icon, and from here I am going to choose outer glow. And of course we need to just click this box right here. And let me just make the radius a bit bigger. Now, of course, the blend mode is set to screen, and screen in opposition to multiply shows everything that is light or white and hide everything that is black. So for glow, I guess it's the best option. Now, of course, we can drop down the opacity to make it just a bit subtle, and drop down the intensity just a bit, and increase the radius, drop the opacity a bit down. I know it now starts to look more like an illustration, maybe like a cartoon, but I just want you to understand that here inside Affinity Designer you can also create Photoshop-like effects for your custom graphics. So there you go. We got the sky, we got the stars, we got the stars, and we also got the